In Nazi-occupied Poland during the height of World War II, one man rose to infamy through sheer brutality. His name was Amon Göth. As commandant of the Płaszów concentration camp, he didn't just enforce Nazi orders. He turned cruelty into routine. But as the war turned against Germany and the Nazi machine began to fall apart, Göth's crimes finally caught up with him, leading to his brutal public execution that would mark him as one of the most feared figures of the Holocaust. Göth was born on December 11, 1908 in Vienna, Austria-Hungary. His family ran a successful publishing business, and he had a relatively stable upbringing. He attended a Catholic school and was expected to take over the family business someday. But by his early 20s, he had grown deeply influenced by far-right politics. In 1930, at the age of 21, Göth joined the Austrian Nazi Party, which was illegal in Austria at the time. That same year, he also joined the SS, a paramilitary unit that was rising in power, alongside Hitler's growing influence in Germany. Göth operated secretly during these early years, working with underground Nazi networks in Austria, smuggling weapons, and organizing illegal cells. He was arrested twice by Austrian authorities for his Nazi activities, but was released both times without facing serious punishment. His dedication to the Nazi cause and his willingness to work in secret operations earned him the attention of senior SS leaders. After Germany annexed Austria in 1938, in what became known as the Anschluss, Göth was rewarded for his early loyalty. His SS rank was formalized, and he was assigned to the SS Totenkampfverbände, the unit responsible for concentration camp operations. By 1942, Göth had already served in various Nazi units operating across occupied Poland, including the SS's Central Construction Office. He had been stationed in Lublin, where he worked under Odilo Globocnik, one of the top officials managing Operation Reinhardt, the Nazi plan to exterminate Poland's Jews. Göth gained direct experience coordinating mass deportations and assisting in the setup of extermination camps like Bełżec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. In early 1943, he was sent to Krakow to take command of the final stage of the Krakow ghetto liquidation, an operation ordered by SS police leader Julian Schörner. Around 8,000 Jews were forcibly removed from their homes during this violent action. Göth led SS men and Ukrainian auxiliaries through the ghetto, shooting people in the streets, in stairwells, and even during searches. Over 2,000 were murdered on the spot, and thousands more were sent to Auschwitz or Bełżec. Immediately following this operation, Göth was promoted and assigned the task of building and commanding a new forced labor camp just southeast of Krakow, Płaszów. Construction began in February 1943 on the site of 2 Jewish cemeteries. Göth had the gravestones repurposed as pavement and roadwork throughout the camp, further dehumanizing the people imprisoned there. Płaszów was originally built to hold forced laborers, but it quickly turned into a center of systematic cruelty. The prisoners were mostly Jews from the Krakow ghetto, along with Polish resistance members, Roma families, and later Hungarian Jews. At its peak, the camp held close to 25,000 inmates, far beyond what it was designed for. Living conditions were brutal. Wooden barracks were overcrowded and unsanitary. Many prisoners slept on the ground or on thin straw mats exposed to the cold. Latrines were just open pits, and water for washing was extremely limited. Diseases like typhus and dysentery spread quickly, and there was no real medical care for sick or injured. Food rations were so low that most prisoners suffered from starvation and extreme weight loss within weeks of arrival. Göth used terror as a daily tool of control. He had no formal schedule for punishments. Executions happened whenever he felt like it. Roll calls could last for hours, often in freezing temperatures. And if someone moved, coughed, or stumbled, they could be shot immediately. Even small acts like pausing during work or not standing straight enough were treated as capital offenses. Prisoners were forced to watch others being killed, which kept fear constant and morale crushed. One of the most disturbing features of Płaszów under Göth was his treatment of children. In May 1944, Dozens of Jewish children, some born in the camp, others brought in with their families, were selected and shot in mass graves. These killings were not hidden. Witnesses later testified that Göth gave the order himself and sometimes took part. He saw children as a burden, useless for labor and risky for escape attempts. Göth's 2 German shepherds, Rolf and Ralf, were trained to respond violently to commands. He often set them on prisoners for minor infractions or simply for his own amusement. The dogs would maul victims in front of others, and Göth would either watch or walk away casually, treating it like routine camp business. Beyond physical violence, psychological abuse was constant. Prisoners were forced to perform humiliating tasks like singing or dancing in front of guards, while others were beaten nearby. Executions were sometimes carried out at random to instill confusion and hopelessness. Göth was known to fire his pistol into crowds just to provoke fear, without aiming at anyone in particular. For many at Płaszów, survival was not just about food or health. It was about avoiding attention. Those who tried to remain invisible had the best chance. But even then, nothing was guaranteed. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire, guard towers, and searchlights. But it was the Commandant's unpredictable violence that made it truly inescapable. While people suffered, Göth himself lived in a large villa located on a hill just above Płaszów. From his balcony, he had a direct view of the entire camp layout, including the barracks, work zones, and execution sites. The villa was spacious and well-furnished. Most of the furniture and decorations had been confiscated from Jews' homes in Krakow, or stolen directly from prisoners. Inside the house, Göth kept his collections of jewelry, watches, furs, silverware, paintings, and even religious items like Torah scrolls and candlesticks. He had cabinets filled with gold teeth pulled from corpses, and he stored prisoner valuables without any attempt to hide the fact that they were stolen. His cellar included wine, fine food, and imported liquor, while most prisoners lived on watery soup and stale bread. He kept several women in his home, including his Austrian mistress, Ruth Calder, who worked as a secretary in the camp. Göth also had sexual relationships with other female workers and SS staff, and there were rumors among camp personnel that some of these relationships were coercive. Calder herself later admitted that she witnessed executions from the villa's balcony and lived in luxury while prisoners were being shot below. Göth's drinking was excessive and daily. He consumed large amounts of vodka and schnapps, often starting before noon. His personality shifted drastically when under the influence. He could be silent and brooding one moment, and explosive the next. SS colleagues and subordinates noted that alcohol made his already brutal behavior worse. He was more likely to issue execution orders or carry out shootings himself when intoxicated. His mood swings and paranoia became more noticeable as the months passed. He frequently accused his own staff of disloyalty, had guards punished for minor infractions, and sometimes questioned prisoners himself during drunken episodes. Reports later submitted to SS investigators described him as mentally unstable and volatile. By early 1944, the situation on the Eastern Front had changed dramatically. The Soviet Red Army had begun a large-scale counteroffensive, reclaiming occupied territories in Ukraine and pushing towards Poland. For the Nazi leadership, it was no longer about expansion. It was about hiding what they had done. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, issued strict orders to dismantle camps, destroy documents, and eliminate physical evidence of genocide. Płaszów, now designated a full concentration camp, became part of this cover-up effort. Mass graves that had been dug during earlier executions were reopened. Prisoners under guard were forced to exhume the decaying bodies, thousands of them, and burn them on pyres made from wood, gasoline, and body fat. Special burning squads were created, and anyone who refused to take part was executed on the spot. The stench of death and smoke covered the entire area for weeks. Göth supervised this process personally. He walked among the burial zones, pistol in hand, watching as prisoners handled corpses of those they had once lived beside. Orders were given to leave no trace. He also increased the frequency of roll calls and expanded the use of collective punishment. If one prisoner escaped or stole food, 10 others might be executed. Every day became more dangerous as the Nazis grew more desperate. At the same time, the Nazi leadership in Krakow began to turn its attention to internal problems. Göth's behavior had grown more erratic, and his excessive theft of prisoner property caught the attention of SS Judge Georg Konrad Morgan, who had been tasked with investigating corruption inside the SS itself. Göth's crime wasn't murder, the SS accepted that as part of his role, but taking for himself what was supposed to be sent to Berlin. SS investigators began building a case against him. Multiple witnesses inside the Płaszów administrative structure reported how Göth stored stolen goods in his villa, sent valuable items back to Austria, and kept forged inventory records. They also noted his drinking, his erratic violence, and his disorganized handling of camp resources. For a regime that demanded strict control, Göth was becoming a liability. As Soviet forces moved closer to Krakow, preparations to evacuate Płaszów began. Many prisoners were sent to Auschwitz, Gross-Rosen, and Mauthausen. By the late summer of 1944, as the Red Army advanced deeper into Poland and the Nazi front lines began collapsing, Göth's situation took a sharp turn. On September 13, 1944, he was arrested by the SS and removed from his post at Płaszów. The charges against him included personal enrichment from confiscated Jewish property, unauthorized executions, and abuse of power beyond what was considered disciplined. Investigators even found that some shipments of valuables never made it to the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, raising concerns about theft on a large scale. Instead of being placed in a prison or SS detention unit, Göth was transferred to a psychiatric hospital in Bad Tölz, Bavaria. The official reason was mental instability, severe depression, paranoid delusions, and erratic behavior. It's unclear whether these diagnoses were accurate or simply convenient, but internal SS reports from the time mentioned symptoms of psychosis and emotional breakdowns. At the hospital, Göth remained under supervision, effectively stripped of command. He never returned to active duty. While he was in custody, Płaszów was in the process of being dissolved. Surviving prisoners were deported to extermination camps or death marches, and the site was cleared to hide evidence of mass killings. When Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, Allied forces took control of what remained of the collapsing Third Reich. Across Europe, Nazi officials tried to flee, hide, or blend in among refugees. Amon Göth, still being held in a psychiatric hospital in Bavaria, was soon located by American troops during their sweep of former SS and Gestapo institutions in the area. Initially, Göth attempted to conceal his identity. He used false papers and claimed he had been a minor officer with no direct role in the Holocaust. But it didn't take long for his name to resurface. Survivors of Płaszów, many of whom had made it through the war in displaced persons camps or with the help of Oskar Schindler, began providing names and testimony to Allied investigators. Göth's name appeared again and again in statements describing shootings, beatings, and executions. He was positively identified by at least 2 survivors who had seen him at the camp and during the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto. Once confirmed, American forces arrested him formally and placed him in a POW detention facility. Rather than face a military tribunal under Allied command, Göth was transferred to Polish custody under the terms of post-war agreements regarding war crimes prosecution. The new Polish government, rebuilding its legal system and documenting Nazi atrocities on its soil, prioritized cases involving direct crimes against its citizens. Göth was considered one of the key figures responsible for terror in occupied Poland. He was extradited to Krakow later in 1945, where he was held at Montelupik prison. The site, once used by the Gestapo to torture Polish resistance fighters, now served as a holding center for accused war criminals. Unlike the Nazis who saw Göth's actions as loyalty, Polish prosecutors saw them as calculated crimes that had targeted civilians, including thousands of Jews, women, children, and political prisoners. In August 1946, Amon Göth was brought before the Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow, a special court established by the Polish government to prosecute high-ranking Nazi officials responsible for crimes committed on Polish soil. His case was one of the earliest and most publicized post-war trials outside of the main Nuremberg proceedings. The charges against him were severe and clearly defined: war crimes, crimes against humanity, and direct involvement in the mass murder of civilians. The prosecution built its case under a range of evidence. Detailed camp records retrieved after the war, along with Nazi administrative files, placed Göth at the center of operations in Płaszów and the liquidation of the Kraków ghetto. More than a dozen eyewitnesses, including Jewish survivors, former Polish prisoners, and even some former Nazi personnel, gave statements or testified in person. Many described how Göth personally executed prisoners without warning or reason, and how he had issued orders for mass shootings and public hangings. Among the evidence presented were official Nazi orders signed by Göth, documents detailing confiscated property, and photographs of the Płaszów camp, including aerial images showing the locations of mass graves and cremation sites. Survivors recounted specific dates, victims, and incidents, including his use of trained dogs to maul inmates, and the mass killing of children during deportation actions. One survivor testified about Göth selecting prisoners for execution during roll calls, often when visibly intoxicated. Others described how he kept stolen valuables in his villa while prisoners lived in starvation. His involvement in the March 1943 liquidation of the Kraków ghetto was a focal point. When asked to respond to the charges, Göth admitted to certain actions, but claimed he was following higher orders issued by his superiors in the SS and general government. He said he had no choice and tried to frame his actions as necessary for maintaining discipline. However, the court rejected this defense, noting that many of his crimes were carried out independently and with unnecessary brutality. Witnesses made it clear that his violence often went far beyond official orders. The trial lasted several weeks, drawing attention across Poland and among international observers documenting post-war justice. On September 5, 1946, the tribunal found Göth guilty on all counts. His crimes were judged not only as part of the Nazi system, but as personal acts of murder, cruelty, and exploitation. He was sentenced to death by public hanging, to be carried out in the city where he had committed so many of his crimes. He spent the last weeks of his life in Montelupich prison. He was 37 years old, awaiting execution in a country that had seen firsthand the results of his cruelty. He was kept in solitary confinement, separated from other inmates under strict supervision. Armed guards monitored him around the clock. There were fears he might attempt to escape or take his own life, as many former SS officers had done to avoid facing justice. But Göth never made any such attempt. He remained calm and passive throughout his detention, showing no visible remorse or emotional breakdown, even after his death sentence was confirmed. He submitted an official petition for clemency to the Polish president at the time, Bolesław Bierut. The plea was reviewed and rejected. The authorities had no intention of sparing him. Public sentiment in Poland was overwhelmingly in favor of his execution. The memories of Płaszów, the Kraków ghetto, and the countless families destroyed by his actions were still fresh. Prison officials noted that Göth spent most of his time alone, occasionally receiving visits from legal staff and clergy. His physical health remained stable, but emotionally he showed signs of detachment. He didn't lash out, nor did he offer any final apology or statement of responsibility. Some reports suggest that he continued to insist he had only done his duty as an officer, refusing to fully acknowledge the human cost of his actions. To the Polish people, Göth's presence in Montelupich symbolized a reversal of power. A man who had once shot prisoners from a balcony now sat behind locked doors, awaiting his fate. His name had become a representation of the Holocaust's worst brutality within Poland's borders. No official visitors, friends, or family members came to see him during his last days. He was completely alone, facing the consequences of years of unchecked violence and power. For many of his victims, this was the only justice they would ever receive. On the morning of September 13th, 1946, the final chapter of Amon Göth's life came to an end. At the prison, preparations were made for his execution. A wooden gallows had been constructed in the prison yard specifically for this occasion. It was not hidden away or done in secrecy. The Polish authorities wanted it to be a visible act of justice, carried out in the same city where Goth had committed many of his crimes. He was woken early, and guards escorted him from his cell to the yard. Witnesses included Polish officials, prison staff, a state-appointed executioner, and a small number of approved observers. Among them were journalists and legal representatives. The moment had great symbolic weight, not only for Poland, but for Holocaust survivors, former prisoners, and families of the victims who had died under his command. Goth wore plain prison clothing. There were no speeches, no final words, and no sign of resistance. He reportedly walked to the scaffold calmly. When the noose was placed around his neck, he remained silent. The executioner gave the signal, and the trapdoor opened, but the mechanics failed. The rope used was measured too long, and instead of a clean hanging, Goth dropped awkwardly and landed on the ground, still alive. The scene turned chaotic for a moment as guards rushed in to lift him back onto the platform. The mistake had to be corrected immediately. A second rope was prepared, shorter and more secure. This time there was no delay. The trapdoor opened again, and the execution succeeded. His neck broke instantly, and he was pronounced dead on the spot. The Polish authorities made no effort to preserve his body. The grave was left unmarked, and no official record was made of the exact location. No friends, family members, or former associates came forward to claim his remains. He left behind a daughter, Monika Göth, born in November 1945. Her mother was Ruth Calder. After Goth's arrest, Calder returned to Austria and raised Monika alone, never telling her the full story of who her father was. For years, Monika believed he had been a war hero or a soldier who had died in battle. It wasn't until adulthood that she discovered the truth. In the 1980s, while researching her family history, Monika came across Goth's name in Holocaust literature and documentaries. What she found devastated her. She learned not only that her father was a concentration camp commandant, but that he had ordered and carried out mass executions. The knowledge caused deep emotional distress, and she later gave public interviews expressing her horror, guilt, and shame. She even met with Holocaust survivors, including children who had narrowly escaped Goth's brutality, seeking to understand the scale of his crimes. Over the decades, survivors of Płaszów and the Krakow ghetto continued to speak about what he had done. Their testimonies were recorded in books, trials, documentaries, and Holocaust museums. In 1993, Goth's role reached a global audience through the film Schindler's List, where he was portrayed by actor Ralph Fiennes. The performance was based on eyewitness accounts and trial records and helped cement Goth's image as one of the most brutal individuals in Nazi history. As more Holocaust archives were opened and war crimes investigations expanded in the decades after his death, additional details about Goth's actions came to light. New documents, survivor statements, and trial transcripts confirmed the scale of his personal involvement in mass murder. His crimes became part of Holocaust education in schools, museums, and remembrance programs across the world. Though he was executed long ago, the memory of what he did never faded. His name remains one of the most chilling reminders of how absolute power, mixed with hatred, can lead to unimaginable cruelty. For the survivors, the trauma never truly ended, but neither did the determination to make sure the world remembered exactly who he was and what he had done.